Okay, could you just start by introducing yourself, please?
Well, my name now is Ann Pearce, but in my diving, when I was diving, my name was Ann Long, and I was in 3 Olympic Games. In between those, I was Commonwealth champion, and I also won the World Student Games, which were held in Moscow. But the 3 Olympic Games I was in was 1952 in Helsinki, 1956 in Melbourne, and 1960 in Rome, and I was placed 5th in each of those Olympic Games.
Okay. And you live in the Rochford district?
I live in Rochford now, yes.
Okay. And in terms of London 2012, what do you think about having the Games in London?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's marvellous, particularly for younger people, and they can aspire and get their dreams actually in focus, and being so local, and there's everybody behind them. I've been down to the Olympic site several times, and it's absolutely marvellous, and I do think that the Olympic Games being held in London is a wonderful thing for England and London.
Okay. And what impact do you think it might have on you personally?
Well, I'm a little bit older now. I do still teach. We are lucky enough to have an Olympic diving stage built now in Southend, and we're hoping that that's going to be used by the young people who want to make these Olympic Games, and in the future as well. So I've got a great interest in diving still. I keep in touch with all my diving friends from years ago, and I think they're quite jealous that I'm in this vicinity, that I can still see the diving.
Okay, so obviously you mentioned the diving centre there. I mean, what impact do you think longer term that'll have on the area and, and on diving as a sport?
I'm hoping that it will take off. I'm hoping that the area will benefit, and the divers themselves will benefit from this diving stage that's there. I know how very different it was for me when I was competing. I used to dive at Ilford, because I lived in Ilford then, and to get onto a 10-metre board I used to have to travel up to Blackpool for an indoor one. In the summer I used to have to dive in open air pools, because they were the only pools which had a 10-metre, but again I had to travel. In those days they were called Lidos. I used to go to Purley, I used to go to Hastings, anywhere to get on a 10-metre diving board. And in those days the water wasn't heated. I used to dive into, not just me, I mean I'm talking about myself, but the other divers were the same. The water was only 52 degrees, which was jolly cold, I can assure you. We used to be able to do about 2 dives, and then we'd have to go and have a hot bath, and then come back and do another 2 dives. It was very hard to train in those days, and it was we had no money, of course. There weren't sponsorships. I used to have to go, well, I went to school, and after school I would rush down to the pool and train. And then, of course, I worked at the Bank of England, and again I used to have to fit my training around my work. In fact, where the Olympic site is now, I used to work in near St Paul's. In my lunch hour, I used to literally run from my office through to Ironmonger Row swimming pool, do 20 minutes training as an added bit of training I could do, and then run back to work. After work, I used to get on the train and get off at Stratford, and of course it was all bomb damage then. And again, I used to walk straight from Stratford through the roads to West Ham Baths, where I could dive, because the Ilford swimming pool used to close in the winter, the first class pool, but the West Ham Baths did have a 3-metre springboard. Well, a 3-metre springboard as such. so I could train there. And this is how we divers and we sports people used to have to do our training. We had no help. We had no, when I say no help, it was very much a personal thing. We had no sponsorship. We had no money given to us. My father had to pay what he could to my trainer, and but it was we were very great friends, the athletes in those days, and this is how I did my training. And then at the weekends, as I say, we used to travel. We used to get as many into a car as we possibly could to save our expenses, and go all the way up to Blackpool, dive ourselves to a standstill, and then come all the way back so that we could go back to school or back to work on the Monday morning. And this is how we did our training. We did have an ASA diving course, which was held. Now that would be an eye-opener to the people today. To start off with, it was in a place called Henley's Lake in Bristol. The diving stage was wooden, and I did my first dive off of a 10-metre board there. Having gone up there, my foot went through the wooden staging. Anyway, I did my dive there and dived. But as we dived in, the place was full of sticklebacks. We used to have to swim to the side and empty our swimsuits with these sticklebacks and then sort of carry on. After that, the diving courses were held at Dordon. It was a cooling pool in a mining area. It was a coal mine, and we used to have the hooter would go, and all these men from the pits would come up and watch us train, and then the hooter would go again, and they'd all disappear, and we dived in the cooling part. And again, we would dive in, go to the bottom, come up black as the ace of spades, because of course the water was it was black. And they were our training. And that was just for a week. We had that for a week. So we had none of these intensive training courses and camps outside. We'd arrive at an Olympic Games, and our competition would probably be the next day. So we had nothing of what the competitors have these days. But I wouldn't change it for anything. I wouldn't change it for anything.
And how did that compare to what other competitors from other countries had in terms of their facilities? Was it similar to what you had, or did they have better facilities?
Well, no. I must admit they were far in advance of our training. In fact, the Russians, in 1952, the Russian team, they didn't stay in the same camp as us. They were always in a different camp. And I remember in Helsinki, the Russian team took hundreds of feet of filming all the other competitors in other, the top competitors in other countries, and they went back, and in 4 years' time they came back to the various sports. Well, I'm just talking about swimming and diving, of course, and they came back, and you could see how they had used these films to benefit their competitors and make their competitors do more or less what, and of course they went on progressing from there. The Americans, of course, were far in advance of us, but again, most of those were, you see, the amateur status was so strong when I was diving. You could receive no money at all. There were television adverts that I was asked to do, and I wasn't allowed to do them, even when I said, we'll put the money into the Olympic purse, because they used to send boxes round, for donations so that people could go to the Olympic Games. And I said, well, any money or anything that I get, put it into the Olympic, but no, they wouldn't allow it. So I was allowed to do no adverts. The swimming gear that we wore, a particular firm asked me to do photos with their swimsuits on. No, I wasn't allowed to do that. I was allowed to do nothing. The amateur status was very, very, very strict. If we went anywhere, if the ASA asked us to go somewhere and give a diving display or something, we had to submit our train ticket. We were allowed a third-class train ticket. If we went over 10 miles, we were allowed 10-shilling meal. Under that, we were only allowed a 5-shilling meal. And all these things had to be submitted. I know I worked, as I told you before, in the Bank of England, and they had an annual swimming gala, and I used to swim in the races and dive in there. But of course they had prizes. They used to give prizes for the winning, and I had to write to Mr. Fern in the ASA to ask permission if I could receive, you know, these prizes. Otherwise I could have been deemed as professional. We were allowed absolutely nothing, so it was, you know, very personal, very hard, but at the same time we knew that and it didn't really bother us. The other countries, you see, particularly the Americans, they were given pocket money, and we weren't given any pocket money when we went to Olympic Games. There, we did get a uniform. We had the uniform for the opening of the Games. I think yes, one swimsuit I think we got. Very little, really, when you look at it, what they get today. Whereas the other countries, they did have an awful lot. It was the same as the badges. We were given badges. Now you can buy the badges now. Now you see, in my day you couldn't. The badges that we were given 2. And in those days they still had this, a lot of people liked badges, so they would swap. Now if anybody, you could get about 10 Russian badges for one England one, because they were so rare. And of course I still have got my badges. I've still kept mine. But yes, it was very different with the other countries, but we did do very well. As I say, I was 5th in Helsinki. Well, I was 5th in the high board, 8th in the springboard, I think I was. And then in Melbourne, I was 5th. I was the only one to make a final there in the springboard. And in Rome, I was 5th. And when you sort of look at it and you think, well, there's only 4 people in the world that can beat me, it was, and we did do not quite such difficult dives as some of them, because women weren't allowed to do some of the dives anyway, but some of the dives were not on the tariff, so we couldn't do them. But we did do a lot of the difficult dives which they're doing now, and we had to practice jolly hard in our own time. And as I say, we had our own coach, who was working for a living half the time.